In the 2025 elections, in the province of Ilocos 23 members of the exact same family ran for government office.
Yeah, 23.
Right. I mean, 23 members of the Singson family, all maneuvering for different positions in a single election cycle, in one single province.
It's a staggering number.
It really is. And for you listening today, we are unpacking the math, the constitutional loopholes, and honestly, the centuries-old warlord history that makes a statistic like that even possible. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me. And, when you zoom out from just that single province, from the Singsons, the sheer scale of this whole architecture really becomes apparent.
Right. It's not just an isolated thing.
No, not at all. The sources we're examining today, they map out a system where nearly 250 families effectively control the political machinery across all 82 provinces of the Philippines.
250 families running a whole country.
Basically, yeah. And they don't just hold, isolated seats here and there. They operate at all tiers of government simultaneously.
Which is wild.
So our mission today is to really dissect the structural and legal mechanisms of how these families capture the state. And more importantly, how they construct these impenetrable barriers to ensure they stay in power across generations.
Right. So for you listening, this is really a real-time study in the tension between a democratic design, a system built on the idea that any citizen can run for public office, and an oligarchic reality where the deck is just completely structurally stacked.
Exactly. We're looking at the literal mechanics of state capture.
Yeah. But before we get into the gears of this machine, we really need to set some parameters here.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yeah, we have to. The source material we're working through today, it centers on some highly charged political figures. We're talking about the Marcoses, the Dutertes, the Aquinos, the Estradas.
Very prominent names.
Extremely.
Yeah.
And the text includes severe allegations, legal charges, and historical controversies. So we need to be crystal clear up front.
Absolutely. It's a really dense, often turbulent history. But our role today is strictly analytical. We are just reporting the statistics, the legal rulings, the timelines, and the economic data exactly as they are presented in the provided source material.
We're not taking political sides here.
No, neither left-wing nor right-wing. We aren't endorsing any viewpoints. We're just looking at the data to understand the underlying mechanics of how this power is consolidated.
Exactly. Just laying out the facts for you so you can understand the system. So let's start with the current landscape, because the trajectory of the data in the text completely defies, the usual assumptions about how democracies mature.
You'd naturally assume that as a republic gets older, power democratizes, right? It disperses.
Right, like more people get a seat at the table over time.
But the data from the article shows the exact opposite. Power is concentrating. By 2025, approximately 80% of provincial governors belong to entrenched political dynasties.
80%?
Yeah. And to give you a baseline, that number was 57% in 2004.
So it's getting worse. Oh, I mean, more entrenched.
The upward trajectory is really the most critical data point here. What's fascinating here is that the system is actively hardening. It's not fading away.
Wow.
If you look at the legislative branch, the House of Representatives has seen dynastic representation rise to 67%. That's up from 48% 2 decades ago.
That is a massive jump.
And it gets more intense. As of late 2024, 80% of district seats were held by dynastic members.
That's almost a total saturation of the available political space.
It really is. And it saturates the local levels, too. Mayoral posts held by dynasties jumped from 40% to 53%.
Half the mayors.
Yep. And in the 2022 Senate elections, a third of the seats were held by siblings.
Literally brothers and sisters sitting in the Senate together.
Exactly. You've got the Cayetanos, the Estrada Escucidos, the Tolfos, the Villers.
It's like a family business at that point. And the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, the PCIJ, they actually created a whole taxonomy to categorize this, right?
Yeah, they break it down into different types. They start with what they call the thin dynasty.
Okay, let's unpack this. What makes a dynasty thin?
So a thin dynasty represents a linear succession. A political clan manages to hold on to one specific elected position over a period of time.
Like just the mayor's office.
Right. The incumbent finishes their term or hits a term limit, and the seat is handed off to a spouse, a sibling, or a child. It's a monopoly, but it's restricted to a single office.
Okay, so if we use an analogy, it's kind of like passing down a single, really lucrative family restaurant.
That's a good way to put it.
You keep the monopoly on that specific street corner, but you aren't necessarily expanding the footprint across town.
Exactly. But then the PCIJ introduces the Fat Dynasty.
And this is where it gets crazy.
This is where the structural expansion happens. A Fat Dynasty occurs when a clan fields multiple members to hold various government positions simultaneously.
At the exact same time.
Yes. So the patriarch might sit as the provincial governor, while the matriarch is the district rep in Congress. The eldest son is the mayor of the capital city, and maybe a daughter sits on the provincial board.
All operating concurrently.
All at once.
So taking the restaurant analogy further, the Fat Dynasty isn't just running the one family restaurant. They've monopolized every single restaurant franchise in the entire county, plus the food supply chain, plus they appoint the health inspector.
Exactly. And the taxonomy gets even more extreme, pushing into what they call the obese dynasty.
Which sounds ridiculous, but it's a real political science term here.
It is. An obese dynasty is any clan with 5 or more members active in politics simultaneously. Like your Singson example earlier.
Right, the 23 members. So they would be like super obese.
Definitely. And then you have the mega dynasties, which we will dissect later, where these regional behemoths form strategic alliances to capture national power.
Okay, but I have to pause here. Because the density of these networks, it fundamentally alters the landscape, sure. But the text highlights this one staggering statistic from the 2022 elections.
The unopposed seats.
Yeah. 4.5% of the positions contested, which is roughly 800 out of 18,000 positions, featured single candidates from warlord political clans, 800 uncontested sites.
Not a single opponent on the ballot.
So let me push back on this for a second. If I'm playing devil's advocate, couldn't this just be democracy working exactly as intended?
How so?
Well, if a local family builds the hospitals, paves the roads, provides disaster relief, the voters are naturally going to develop intense brand loyalty. If I'm a constituent and I trust the mayor, why wouldn't I vote for his daughter?
That's the common defense, yes.
Right. So is this actually a failure of the system or just a populist, rewarding, really effective local management?
Well, brand recognition and the incumbency advantage are absolutely massive factors. The text acknowledges that. Dynastic politicians do have a statistically higher probability of winning simply due to those established networks.
They have the name recognition.
Sure. But when we look at those 800 unopposed positions, we have to look at the mechanism behind the silence.
What do you mean by silence?
The lack of opposition. The source explicitly states that these candidates ran unopposed because no one dared to contest them.
Dared. That's a heavy word.
Because we are talking about warlord clans. When an election features zero competition because the barrier to entry involves severe physical or economic risk, we are no longer looking at brand loyalty.
You're looking at fear.
We're looking at a structural exclusion. The machinery of the state, the local police, the business permits, the patronage networks, it's all been so thoroughly captured by the incumbent family that mounting a campaign against them becomes a literal impossibility.
Wow. Okay, that distinction between brand loyalty and active suppression is vital. It shifts the entire framework of how you have to view these elections.
It's not just popularity.
No, we aren't just looking at popular families, we're looking at localized monopolies backed by the apparatus of the state, which really brings us to the origins.
The history.
Yeah. How does a republic, which is founded on democratic principles, cultivate a system where 250 families can just functionally partition an entire nation?
The architecture of this power has historical roots that predate the modern republic by a long shot. The text traces this back to the colonial eras.
Okay, take us back.
In the 19th century, under Spanish rule, you had the peninsulares. These were the Spanish-born aristocracy who controlled the vast agricultural estates.
The major landholders.
Right. But as the Spanish Empire's economic grip loosened and British and American commercial interests began to penetrate the archipelago, a power vacuum started to emerge.
And nature abhors a vacuum, right?
Okay.
Especially a political one.
Exactly. And that vacuum was rapidly filled by an ascendant merchant elite. The source details how this new class was largely comprised of foreign expatriates and merchants of Chinese origin.
So they came in with capital.
Yes, they accumulated capital, they integrated with the remnants of that Spanish-sanctioned landholding elite, and they effectively established themselves as a de facto aristocracy. They possessed the land, the capital, and the trade networks.
It's just a remarkable survival story of elite continuity, honestly.
It really is, because this de facto aristocracy didn't just survive the transition from Spanish to American colonial rule, they completely adapted to it.
Right, because when the Americans arrived, They needed local administrators.
They had to pacify and govern the newly acquired territory. And rather than dismantling the existing power structures, the colonial administration often co-opted them. They placed these wealthy, educated elites into administrative roles.
Making them even more powerful.
Yep. Then they survived the devastation of the Japanese occupation during World War II. And when independence was finally achieved, they were the only ones with the capital and the established networks to assume control of the new republic.
They were the only ones left standing who actually knew how to pull the levers of power.
Exactly. And the text notes an evolutionary dynamic here. Over the decades, older dynasties might occasionally go extinct, maybe due to internal collapse or shifting fortunes, but the system itself never fractured.
Newer dynasties just emerged to take their place.
They simply assumed control of the abandoned territory. They are highly, highly adaptive.
And that adaptability, I think, brings us to the most fascinating legal paradox in Philippine jurisprudence, the 1987 Constitution.
The 1987 Constitution is the centerpiece of the entire puzzle.
It really is.
Okay.
Because this was drafted in the immediate aftermath of the People Power Revolution, right?
Yes, after Marcos was ousted.
So the framers were acutely aware of the dangers of concentrated power. They had just lived through it. So they wrote Article 2, Section 26.
Which is very specific.
I have the text here. It reads, "The state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be defined by law."
The intent is unambiguous. Prohibit political dynasties.
It says it right there in plain English.
But the execution relies entirely on that trailing clause. As may be defined by law.
The catch.
The framers recognized the structural threat, sure, but they deferred the actual definition and enforcement to the legislative branch.
To Congress.
They tasked the Philippine Congress with passing an enabling law to define exactly what constitutes a political dynasty and how to dismantle it.
It is the ultimate systemic loophole. You're essentially putting up a massive sign at a country club that says, "No running by the pool unless defined by the pool committee."
That's a great way to look at it.
But the catch is, the pool committee is made up exclusively of Olympic sprinters who have built their entire lives around running by the pool.
The analogy holds up structurally because the conflict of interest is absolute. The legislative body tasked with outlawing dynasties is overwhelmingly composed of dynastic members.
They're asking them to fire themselves.
A 2014 study from New York University, cited in the text, estimated that at that time, 70% of all jurisdiction-based legislators in the Philippine Congress were embedded in a political dynasty.
7%.
So asking them to pass an anti-dynasty law is literally asking them to legally legislate their own families out of existence.
Which they are never going to do.
Predictably, they simply refuse to pass the enabling law. It just stalls forever.
Okay, but the system did attempt to introduce a safeguard through the local government code, right?
Huh?
Republic Act 7160.
Ah, yes. Term limits.
They introduced term limits. A local elected official can only serve 3 consecutive terms in the same position. 3 years per term, 9 years total.
That's the law.
On paper, that looks like a hard stop on monopolistic power. If you can only serve 9 years, the dynasty is forced to relinquish the seat.
Problem solved, right? On paper, yes. In practice. As Professor Ronald Mendoza points out in the text, term limits became the exact catalyst that forced thin dynasties to mutate into fat dynasties.
Wait, really? It made it worse?
Oh, absolutely. The political clans realized that to survive a term limit, they couldn't just step down, they had to keep the seat warm.
Ah, the bench warmer strategy.
Precisely. If a mayor maxes out his 3 consecutive terms, the law prohibits him from running for a 4th. It does not prohibit his wife, his son, or his brother from running.
So they just tag out.
So the incumbent fields a family member to take the mayoral seat for 1 term. This breaks the consecutive streak.
Wow.
After that single term, the original mayor is legally permitted to run again, starting a brand new 3-term cycle.
So the technicality of the law is flawlessly upheld,
Yeah.
while the entire spirit of the legislation is just completely obliterated.
Complete.
But what does this actually look like on the ground? Say the incumbent mayor puts his wife in the seat. She wins based on his machinery. But who is actually running the municipality? Is she an independent executive, or is the husband just, running the town from the living room couch while she signs the paperwork?
The source material suggests it is very much the latter. The power doesn't shift, merely the proxy holding the title.
It's just a puppet situation.
Often, yes, but it gets more insidious. because these families now had to train multiple members to hold office just to play this game of musical chairs.
Right, they need more bodies.
Exactly. They inadvertently expanded their machinery. If you have to groom your son to hold the mayoral seat while you wait out your term limit, well, why not have him run for Congress once you take the mayorship back?
Oh, man.
The term limit law, designed to break dynasties, provided the exact evolutionary pressure needed to force them to expand across multiple offices simultaneously.
The unintended consequences of structural reform. That's, wow. Which raises the question, for you listening, has the anti-dynasty provision of the 1987 Constitution ever been successfully weaponized? Is there any corner of Philippine law where the prohibition actually has teeth?
Yes, but in incredibly specific, highly compartmentalized arenas.
Like where?
The text identifies only 2 successful anti-dynasty laws currently on the books.
Out of, what, almost 40 years?
Yep. The first is the Sangguniang Kabataan Reform Law of 2016, commonly known as the SK Reform Law.
The SK is the youth council system, right?
Correct. The law shifted the age bracket for youth council participation to 18 to 24 years old. But the crucial mechanism is a strict prohibition. It forbids any individual from seeking a youth council position if they are related within the second degree of consanguinity or affinity to any elected or appointed official in the same area.
So you can't be the mayor's kid and run for the youth council.
Exactly. And the second instance is the Bangsamoro Electoral Code, enacted in 2023 and approved in 2024. This applies specifically to the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or BARM. It stipulates that nominees submitted by regional political parties cannot be related within the second degree of consanguinity or affinity.
Okay, so we have 2 laws.
Right.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, why these 2? Why did these specific laws manage to pass the gauntlet of a dynastic Congress when everything else fails?
The answer lies in political containment. Banning the relatives of politicians from running for a local youth council or enforcing restrictions within a newly formed autonomous region in the South, it poses absolutely zero threat to the national machinery of the senators and congressional reps sitting in Manila.
It's politically inexpensive virtue signaling.
Exactly. They can claim to be upholding the Constitution. They get a headline saying they passed an anti-dynasty measure without risking a single element of their own power bases.
That's a localized quarantine.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
But when civil society attempt to apply that same standard to national or general local elections, the legislative resistance is absolute. I mean, the text provides a literal graveyard of failed anti-dynasty bills.
The institutional apathy is staggering. The Bayan Muna Party filed bills in 2001 and again in 2010, and the text highlights a detail about the 2010 attempt that is incredibly revealing.
What happened?
During the committee hearing for that anti-dynasty bill, none of the political parties even bothered to attend.
None of them.
None.
That silence is deafening. I mean, it isn't just a vote against the bill. It's a total refusal to even acknowledge the legitimacy of the conversation.
They just ignored it out of existence.
And the attempts just kept crashing against the wall.
Yeah.
Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago filed a highly comprehensive bill in 2011, Senate Bill 2649.
She tried to plug every conceivable loophole, banning relatives up to the second degree from running in the same province, banning them from local positions if their relative held a national position.
Even trying to ban non-relatives from running if they were related to each other.
Right. Yes. And the list of failed bills continues. Consolidated House bills in 2013, House Speaker Feliciano Belmonte in 2016, bills by Lawrence Fortune in 2018, Senators Drilon, Lacson, and Pangilinan in 2019, Robin Padilla in 2024, the Makabayan Bloc and Akbayan representatives in 2025.
It just goes on and on. Dozens of bills spanning decades authored by legislators across the entire political spectrum, all systematically buried by the collective self-preservation of the chamber.
They will not vote themselves out of a job.
Right. Okay, so we've mapped out the mechanics of how this power is built, how it evolves, how it immunizes itself against legislative reform, but we have to transition into the material consequences here.
Real-world impact.
Yeah. If you are a citizen living under the architecture of a fat dynasty, what does this actually mean for your day-to-day life? What is the human and economic cost of this monopolization?
The socioeconomic impact detailed in the sources paints a grim picture of structural stagnation. The most glaring correlation is with poverty.
Okay, let's look at that.
Studies cited in the text establish that the 10 poorest provinces in the Philippines are all ruled by political dynasties.
10 poorest.
All of them. All of them. These provinces are characterized by low levels of human development, substandard governance, high levels of violence, and severely depressed business climates.
Now, correlation isn't automatically causation. We have to be fair here.
Mm.
Does entrenched poverty create an environment where warlord dynasties can thrive because the populace is dependent on their patronage? Or do the dynasties intentionally suppress economic development to maintain that dependence?
It's a bit of a chicken and egg question, and the text approaches it carefully, but it points to empirical data showing a distinct positive relationship between the incidence of poverty and the proportion of fat dynasties in a given province.
So as one goes up, the other goes up.
Yes, Professor Mendoza summarizes it bluntly in the text. The more fat dynasties you have, the more poverty there's likely to be.
To understand the mechanics of why dynastic rule correlates so heavily with poverty, the text introduces something called the Carnegie effect.
Right, from Andrew Carnegie.
Yeah, the industrialist. He observed that inheriting massive wealth often strips the next generation of the ambition and necessity to work hard.
Because everything is handed to them.
Exactly. So when we apply the Carnegie effect to political governance, the implications are disastrous. Let's walk through how that actually functions in a governor's office.
Yeah.
If you are a first-generation politician who had to claw your way into office, you likely did so by proposing policies, building coalitions, and proving some level of administrative competence.
Yeah.
You had to earn it.
You had to be good at the job, or at least good at campaigning based on issues.
Right. But if you're a third-generation dynastic heir, your political capital is entirely inherited. You don't need a groundbreaking policy platform on, say, agricultural reform. You just need your last name and your family's established machinery.
Exactly. Because the barrier to entry is eliminated for the heir, the necessity for bureaucratic competence and educational achievement drops precipitously.
They just don't have to try as hard.
The text notes that dynastic politicians often possess lower educational attainment compared to non-dynastic challengers. They simply do not have the incentive to govern effectively or innovate. Why would they? Their re-election is functionally guaranteed by the machinery, not by their performance.
Which creates a massive brain drain in local governance. The smartest, most innovative minds in a province aren't going to enter public service because the mayoral seat is already reserved for the governor's nephew.
Why bother running when the deck is stacked?
Exactly. And beyond mere incompetence, the text points to a much darker economic reality: the absolute fusion of political power and private corporate interest.
This is where it gets highly lucrative. The conflict of interest is structural. Political dynasties rarely consist solely of political operatives. They are deeply entrenched in the economic fabric of their territory.
Right, they own everything.
They own the major land holdings, the construction firms, the transportation network.
So think about the mechanics of corruption in this environment. If your family controls the provincial budget, and your family also owns the primary cement and construction companies in the region,
then the bidding process for public infrastructure is entirely performative.
it's a joke. The dynasty dictates the budget, awards the contract to themselves, and oversees their own compliance.
The source indicates widespread evidence of dynasties utilizing their political dominance to extract wealth through unmerited government contracts, misallocation of public funds, and outright graft.
Because who's going to audit them?
No one. Because they control the local investigative and judicial apparatus, accountability is virtually non-existent.
And that lack of accountability extends far beyond financial corruption. It metastasizes into lethal impunity.
Yes, the violence.
The text draws a direct line between political dynasties and severe human rights violations, including extrajudicial killings.
When a family operates a mega-dynasty, they don't just hold the executive office. They exert profound influence over the police forces, the local prosecutors, and the judiciary.
The entire system works for them.
The criminal justice system is effectively subordinated to the dynasty's preservation.
The source quotes a Philippine Star editorial that captures this perfectly. It says, "Dynasty building undermines the criminal justice system. This has engendered impunity, as the nation has seen in so many brazen political killings."
And the text provides the most horrifying modern manifestation of this impunity, the Maguindanao massacre of 2009.
This part it's incredibly heavy.
It is. The context of the Maguindanao massacre requires understanding how warlord clans are cultivated. The Ampatuan family held absolute control over the province of Maguindanao, and Mampatacion Ampatuan Sr. was the governor, and his sons held key mayoralties and governorships within the autonomous region.
A completely obese dynasty.
Yes, and crucially, The text notes they received extensive backing from the national administration under President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo,
Right.
which allowed them to essentially operate and arm a massive private militia.
And we have to be clear here. The concept of a private army in this context isn't some clandestine group hiding in the mountains.
No, not at all.
These are often deeply integrated, quasi-legal militias, armed and funded through the diversion of state resources, designed to project the dynasty's violent power openly.
And the culmination of that unchecked power occurred on November 23, 2009. A rival politician, Ismael Toto Manguda Datu, intended to challenge the Ampachuans in the 2010 election.
Just filing to run against them?
Yes. A convoy of his family members, his supporters, and 32 journalists were en route to file his certificate of candidacy.
32 journalists were with them.
Yes. They were intercepted by an armed force comprised of police officers and Ampachuan militiamen. 57 people were abducted, murdered, and buried in mass graves using a government-owned backhoe. Reports indicated several victims were raped prior to execution.
Right? 57 people. Slaughtered in broad daylight, not during a civil war, but simply because a rival attempted to file election paperwork.
It's hard to process.
The sheer arrogance required to execute a massacre of that scale and to use state-owned heavy machinery to hide the bodies, it is the ultimate endpoint of dynastic impunity. They truly believed that because they controlled a province, they were entirely insulated from consequence.
And for a long time they were. The text notes that martial law had to be declared in the province just to apprehend them.
Martial law, just to arrest one family.
Yes. And while several Ampachuan brothers and accomplices were eventually sentenced to life imprisonment in 2019, the fact that the architecture allowed them to amass that much violent capability in the first place is terrifying.
Impunity scales up, though. While Maguindanao represents the violent extreme at the provincial level, the text also details the financial impunity executed at the national level, specifically focusing on the Marcos family.
Right. Ferdinand Marcos ruled the Philippines from 1965 until his ouster in the People Power Revolution of 1986.
The scale of the wealth extraction here is just difficult to comprehend. The text notes that Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos legally declared a combined lawful income of roughly $13,500 over the course of his presidency.
That was their official salary.
Right. Yet upon their ouster, the Philippine Supreme Court ruled they had amassed astronomical wealth through illicit means, dictating that these assets be forfeited to the state or used to compensate human rights victims.
The mechanics of this extraction, what's called the Marcos plunder, it relied on the absolute monopolization of the national economy. We're talking about the creation of shell companies, the diversion of foreign aid, and the installation of cronies to monopolize key agricultural sectors like sugar and coconuts.
They just siphoned everything.
They funneled profits right back to the regime. The text cites estimates that in just the final years of the administration, between $5 billion and $13 billion was acquired. And Jesus Estanislao, a prominent economist cited in the text, suggests the total extraction over the 21-year regime could reach as high as $30 billion.
$30 billion extracted from a developing nation. The economic devastation of that kind of capital flight is generational.
It is.
Now, to maintain the strict neutrality of our analysis and accurately reflect the entirety of the source material, we do have to pivot to the theoretical counterarguments. Academic literature does present frameworks where dynastic rule might possess advantageous elements.
Yes, there are academics who argue the other side. The primary counterpoint cited in the text is Mancur-Olson's theory of political governance, specifically the stationary bandit theory.
The stationary bandit, let's unpack the logic of this theory. Because how does a bandit become an asset to a developing economy? That sounds counterintuitive.
It does. So the theory distinguishes between a roving bandit and a stationary bandit. A roving bandit is analogous to a non-dynastic politician who knows they only have a single 3-year term in office.
They're only there for a short time.
Right. Because their time horizon is short, their incentive is to extract as much wealth as quickly as possible and leave, metaphorically burning the village behind them.
Get in, get rich, get out.
Exactly. A dynastic politician, however, is a stationary bandit. They expect their family to control the territory for decades, perhaps centuries. Therefore, their time horizon is long.
So they have skin in the game.
Yes. It is against their own self-interest to burn the village. Instead, they are incentivized to build infrastructure, maintain order, and foster long-term economic development so that the territory produces more wealth for them to extract over the long term.
Okay, it's the logic of a farmer versus a strip miner. The farmer tends the land so it yields crops year after year.
Precisely.
It's an elegant economic theory, but applying it to the reality we just discussed is challenging. If the stationary bandit theory holds true, and dynasties are incentivized to develop their territories for long-term extraction, why are the 10 poorest provinces in the Philippines ruled by dynasties?
That's the primary critique of the theory in this context.
Right. The theory suggests they should be building robust economies to tax, but the empirical data shows they're presiding over systemic poverty. Does the long-term stability offered by a dynasty matter if it's merely the stability of deprivation?
It is a massive tension that the academic data hasn't fully reconciled.
The text provides one other theoretical positive, right? The assertion that political dynasties have facilitated increased political participation for women.
Yes, the structural barriers to entry in Philippine politics are immense, but female politicians hailing from established dynasties can bypass these barriers by utilizing their family's existing machinery and capital.
It provides access, undeniably. But it's a deeply conditional access, right? It's restricted entirely to women of a specific ultra-elite socioeconomic class. It doesn't necessarily democratize the system, it merely diversifies the oligarchy.
That's a fair assessment of the data.
So we spent a lot of time on the abstract theories, the economic models, the broad statistics. Let's ground this in reality by examining the specific families detailed in the source. Because the text provides several case studies that perfectly illustrate the diverse strategies these dynasties employ.
Let's start with the sheer endurance of the Ortega family.
Yes, the Ortegas.
The Ortega family in the province of La Union is highlighted as possessing the longest unbroken political rule in the Philippines. Their dominance dates back 124 years.
To 1901. Think about what the world looked like in 1901.
It's incredible. The dynasty was initiated by Joaquin Ortega, who was appointed as the civil governor by the American-backed Taft Commission.
They secured the beachhead during the colonial era, and they simply never let go.
The text notes it took 21 succeeding governors before another Ortega, Joaquin Jr., was elected to the seat, but once they reconsolidated, the line of succession was ironclad. Joaquin Jr., Justo, Victor, Manuel, Francisco III, Rafael.
But the Ortega case study is vital because it exposes the internal vulnerabilities of a dynasty that has grown too large. As we discussed earlier, the pressure to expand forces thin dynasties to become fat dynasties.
Right.
But what happens when the family tree produces more ambitious politicians than there are available seats in the province?
We saw the result in the 2025 elections.
This detail from the text is wild to me. Mario Eduardo Campos Ortega became the 29th governor of La Union. But to win that seat, he had to unseat the incumbent governor.
And who is the incumbent?
The incumbent was Rafael Ortega David, who was the first female governor of the province. And Rafael is Mario's grandniece.
A great-uncle ran a campaign to tear down his own grandniece to take the governor's mansion.
Exactly.
Analytically, this is the systemic pressure point. When the external opposition is entirely neutralized, the dynasty begins to cannibalize itself.
They run out of enemies, so they fight each other.
The machinery fragments as different branches of the family war over the same finite resources. It is a spectacular demonstration of how a monopoly, free from outside competition, will eventually generate its own internal challengers.
That's fascinating. Now let's pivot to the financial capital of the country and examine how a family flawlessly executes the benchwarmer strategy we talked about to bypass term limits, the Binays of Makati City.
Ah, the Binays. They have maintained executive control of Makati City for 37 years, beginning in 1988.
37 years in the wealthiest city.
The dynasty's founder, Jejomar Jojo Binay, originally entered the political arena as a human rights lawyer. He was appointed as the officer in charge of Makati by President Corazon Aquino following the 1986 revolution.
So he comes in right after Marcos falls.
Right. He subsequently won the mayoral election and served the maximum 3 consecutive terms, ending in 1998.
Okay, so he hits the constitutional brick wall. The term limit is supposed to force him out. So what is the play?
The play is proxy substitution. His wife, Elenita Binay, runs for mayor and serves a single 3-year term from 1998 to 2001.
She keeps the seat warm.
Because the consecutive streak of Jejomar Binay is now technically broken, the legal restriction is reset. Jejomar returns, reclaims the mayorship, and serves another 3 consecutive terms from 2001 to 2010.
9 years, a brief intermission for his wife, and then another 9 years.
It works perfectly. He then elevates to the national stage, winning the vice presidency of the Philippines.
But the crown jewel, the mayorship of the wealthiest city in the country, cannot be surrendered. They can't let that go.
So the succession moves to the next generation. His son, Jejomar Jr., assumes the mayorship. However, his tenure is interrupted when he's unseated and permanently banned from public office by the ombudsman over grave misconduct charges related to the allegedly overpriced construction of a city parking building.
The dynasty suffers a severe legal blow, but the machinery immediately pivots. Right?
Instantly, the sun goes down, so the daughter steps up. Abigail Benet takes over and is the incumbent mayor.
It's just a seamless transition.
And the expansion doesn't stop at the local executive level. And another daughter, Nancy Benet, is elevated to the national legislature.
The Senate.
Yes. The text specifically notes that Nancy had zero prior government or administrative experience, yet she successfully ran for the Senate in 2013 and was reelected in 2019 purely on the strength of the dynastic brand and machinery.
It is a masterful, multi-generational game of musical chairs that entirely subverts the intention of the local government code.
Next, we must examine the Villar family, based in Las Piñas. If the Binets represent the circumvention of term limits, the Villars serve as the ultimate case study in the structural conflict of interest between legislative power and massive corporate holdings.
Okay, yeah. The text lists the Villars as one of the wealthiest political dynasties in the country.
Yeah.
But their wealth is not derived primarily from agriculture or traditional patronage, but from a massive real estate empire.
They own Vista Land and Camella, which are absolute behemoths in the Philippine property development sector.
There's subdivisions everywhere.
Yes. And they seamlessly integrated this corporate power with national legislative authority. Manuel Villar served as a representative, Speaker of the House, and President of the Senate. His wife, Cynthia, served as a representative and then assumed his Senate seat.
So they have immense power over legislation.
The intersection of their legislative actions and their corporate interests is profound. The source highlights that Senator Cynthia Villar was a principal author of the Rice Tarification Law, a highly controversial piece of legislation that significantly impacted the agricultural sector and reportedly reduced the income of local farmers.
But the most glaring fusion of state and private interest occurred with their son, Mark Villar.
This is a textbook example.
Mark Villar was appointed as the Secretary of the Department of Public Works and Highways. Think about the sheer mechanical advantage of that arrangement. Your family owns one of the largest real estate and subdivision developers in the nation. The profitability of those subdivisions is entirely dependent on infrastructure, roads, highways, access points.
It dictates the property value.
Right. And your son is the cabinet secretary in charge of deciding where the national government spends billions of pesos to build those exact roads and highways.
The text provides a specific, tangible example of this synergy, the Cavitec C5 link. This was a highly controversial flyover and expressway project constructed in Las Piñas, which is simultaneously the Villar family's political stronghold and a primary hub for their extensive real estate developments.
So he decides where the highway goes, and it happens to go right by their properties.
The strategic routing of national infrastructure directly enhances the value of their private land holdings. It is the crystallization of how a fat dynasty operates. Political power secures the infrastructure, which skyrockets the corporate valuation, which generates the massive capital required to fund the next political campaign.
It's a closed, self-sustaining loop.
Yeah.
It's brilliant, structurally speaking, but devastating for everyone else.
And that brings us to the apex of the architecture, the evolution from regional fat dynasties into the mega dynasty.
The mega dynasty.
The text uses the alliance between the Marcos and Duterte families to illustrate how disparate regional powers can fuse to capture the entire state apparatus.
And what's striking here is the diversity of their origins. We've seen human rights lawyers, real estate moguls, and earlier, the text mentioned the Aquino family's roots in the revolution, and the Estrada family leveraging massive celebrity from the film industry to capture the presidency.
The entry vectors vary wildly, but the consolidation playbook is identical once they're in.
Let's look at the Marcos and Duterte playbook.
The Marcos family, deeply rooted in the northern province of Ilocos Norte, executed one of the most methodical political rehabilitations in modern history. Following their exile in 1986, they systematically reclaimed power.
They came back and started climbing again.
Imelda Marcos secured a seat in the House of Representatives. Ime Marcos controlled the governorship and then ascended to the Senate. Bongbong Marcos followed the exact same trajectory: governor, senator, and eventually positioning himself for the presidency in 2022.
But the presidency requires a national mandate. right? And the Marcos machinery was heavily concentrated in the north. To ensure absolute victory, they required a counterpart in the south.
They found it in the Duterte family. The Dutertes had transformed Davao City in the southern island of Mindanao into an impenetrable political fortress. Rodrigo Duterte held the mayorship for over 2 decades before his stunning ascent to the presidency in 2016.
He had total control down there.
He established a template of absolute local control where his children, Sarah, Paolo, and Sebastian, flawlessly rotated through the mayoral, vice-mayoral, and congressional seats, creating a localized monopoly as robust as any in the country.
So you have the north and the south.
In 2022, the architecture reached its logical conclusion. Bongbong Marcos, the heir to the northern mega-dynasty, ran for president in a unified ticket with Sara Duterte, the heir to the southern mega-dynasty, running for vice president.
They just joined forces.
The text describes this explicit partnership as the ultimate mega-dynasty, the strategic coalition of regional warlord families designed to completely overwhelm the electoral map.
And they won in a landslide.
It proves that the most effective way to secure national power is to simply merge the largest regional monopolies.
Okay, so we have spent the last hour dissecting a machine that possesses seemingly infinite capital, multi-generational brand loyalty, control over local judiciaries, and a Congress that actively protects its existence. The analytical question that demands to be answered for you listening is, how does civil society counter or structure this resilient? Is there a resistance, and what are their vectors of attack?
The source outlines a dedicated, if structurally outgunned, resistance movement driven by civil society organizations. You have groups like MADI, the movement against dynasties.
Right.
You have Andayamo, the anti-dynasty movement. You have vital election watchdogs like Contra Daya, which literally translates to against fraud, and Lente, the legal network for truthful elections.
And they're doing the groundwork.
They do the grueling work on the ground. They monitor electoral abuses. They map out the expanding family trees of the fat dynasties, and they attempt to educate the electorate.
But public education and electoral mobilization face a severe structural ceiling when you're operating in provinces where 4.5% of the seats are uncontested due to warlord dominance. You can't mobilize voters if there's no one else on the ballot.
Exactly. Because the traditional democratic route voting them out is compromised by extreme wealth and localized fear, and because the legislative route is completely blockaded by the dynasties themselves, civil society has been forced to adopt a radical, novel legal strategy.
Out of sheer desperation, they are attempting to bypass the legislature entirely and appeal directly to the judicial branch.
The text details that in 2024, a coalition of lawyers from the University of the Philippines filed a petition with the Supreme Court. They filed a petition for mandamus, asking the highest court to legally compel Congress to fulfill its constitutional duty and pass the anti-dynasty law.
And in 2025, a broad political coalition called One Sambayan filed a similar petition.
This strategy precipitates a massive constitutional stress test. The principle of the separation of powers dictates that the judiciary interprets the law, but it cannot force the legislature to write a law.
Right, they're separate branches.
However, the Constitution explicitly mandates that dynasties be prohibited. The civil society groups are arguing that Congress is an active, decades-long violation of the Constitution by refusing to act.
Can the Supreme Court force a co-equal branch of government to legislate its own members out of power?
It is a legal long shot, but it highlights the profound desperation of the movement. They are resorting to complex constitutional litigation because the fundamental mechanics of democratic representation have been captured by the oligarchy.
Imagine being a citizen trying to reform this system. Your opponent is the incumbent mayor who controls the local police. The mayor's brother is the congressman who refuses to pass the law that would restrict the mayor. And their cousin owns the construction company that funds all of their campaigns.
You're boxed in from every side.
You're trying to change the rules of a game where the opponent is simultaneously the referee, the scorekeeper, and the entity that wrote the rulebook. It's incredibly daunting.
To synthesize the entirety of the source material we have examined today, the Philippine political dynasty system is not an anomaly of a young democracy. It is a highly sophisticated, deeply entrenched system of state capture.
It's working exactly how they built it to work.
It utilizes historical continuity, strategic marriage, the exploitation of constitutional loopholes, and the total fusion of public office with private corporate wealth. It is an architecture perfectly engineered to perpetuate itself, and the empirical data suggests it does so at the direct expense of economic development, bureaucratic competence, and democratic equality.
We have dragged you through an incredibly dense, complex, and often frustrating labyrinth today. But by examining the mechanics, the transition from thin to fat dynasties, the benchwarmer strategies bypassing term limits, the Carnegie effect rotting local governance, and the terrifying realities of warlord impunity, you now possess a structural understanding of how oligarchic power actually operates in the real world. You can see the gears turning beneath the surface of the electoral statistics.
The central takeaway from this deep dive is a stark warning regarding institutional design. The text demonstrates definitively that constitutional mandates and democratic structures, like elections and term limits, are entirely insufficient to guarantee democratic outcomes if the underlying socioeconomic power dynamics are left unchecked and allowed to consolidate.
I would leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the vulnerabilities we uncovered today. We looked at the Ortega family, where a great-uncle ran a campaign to destroy his own grandniece's political career just to take her seat. We looked at the Singsons, fielding an absurd 23 family members in a single election year.
Yeah.
As these fat dynasties continue to expand, breeding more and more politically ambitious heirs who all feel entitled to executive power, they run into a hard mathematical limit. The dynasty expands exponentially, but the number of available mayoralties and governorships remains entirely static.
There are only so many seats.
Right. So if the absolute foundation of a mega-dynasty's power relies on unified, unbroken family control, what happens when they run out of seats? Does the ultimate collapse of this oligarchic system come not from the voters, not from a paralyzed Congress, and not from civil society petitions to the Supreme Court?
Does it come from within?
Exactly. Does the machine eventually tear itself apart from the inside? Will the ultimate threat to these monopolies simply be inevitable? Thanksgiving dinner-style family feuds where cousins and siblings turn their massive, acquired war chests against each other, fracturing the dynasties because they simply became too big and too hungry for their own good. Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It is heavy material, but understanding the architecture of power is the only way to ever begin dismantling it. We'll see you next time.